Hello everyone and welcome. So as you may have noticed, I have kind of a lot of armor. I have mail, armella, greaves down there, arm guards, and helmet, all that kind of stuff. I don't have gauntlets, so I basically don't have any way of protecting my hands when I'm fighting. And you may think that, well, protecting your hands is very important when you're fighting because you're using a sword or any kind of other weapon that you're extending in front of you, and well, if you're extending your sword in front of you, your hand is extended, and therefore you will probably get hit in the hand if you get hit anyway. So yes, most of the time protecting your hand is very important. That is why we have guards and stuff like that on the swords. However, it is not always very important. For example, if you are fighting with a shield, protecting your hand with a gauntlet or with a guard or anything like that is actually not that necessary, because when you are fighting with a shield, you keep your hand behind the shield and use your shield to protect your hand. So if you're attacking, you're bringing your shield forward at the same time to protect your hand. And this works in any direction, anything. You can do this at all time. And that is how you actually fight with a shield, and therefore you don't need that much hand protection when you are fighting with your weapon, because you keep your hand behind your shield and won't therefore need that much protection. And that is why throughout most of history people haven't used gauntlets, because it was quite unnecessary, because most of the time they used shields. Of course, there were exceptions. Some used spears in two hands, some used Dane axes, falxes, whatever, that were two-handed. So, of course, if you're using a two-handed weapon, you're not using a shield. But most of the time, fighting was done with a shield. And if you have a shield, you don't need a gauntlet, because you're going to protect your hand with the shield. And the same goes for guards on swords. So, this is kind of a long sword, training sword, and it has a guard. Now, a guard is very useful to protect you against sword slashers when you're not using a shield. However, once you are using a shield, having a guard isn't very necessary, and it may even be a detriment to your fighting, simply because the guard is going to stop on the rim of your shield and not be able to continue any further. Also, when you're turning around here, especially the inside here, it might hook up to the handle, anything like that, and may become impractical to use. So having a guard on your sword may actually not be that good if you're using a shield, and that is why throughout most of history swords haven't had guards at all. Like if you look at the Viking sword, it didn't have a particularly long guard. If you look at the Gladius, it didn't have a particularly long guard. Basically, no swords had particularly long guards, and definitely not as long as the longsword. So why did gauntlets even become a thing, or even guards? Well, that is simply because of the fact that after the Viking Age, so during the late Middle Ages, people started more and more to use strapped shields. So this is basically a strapped shield, basically strapped to my arm instead of me holding it with a grip like this. And there are several reasons why people started using these shields, partly because cavalry was more common, and using such a sword when you're riding a horse more easy, because you can hold the reins or anything in this hand without needing to hold the big grip. You can even slip your arm further through and just have this around your wrist while you have your hand completely free. The problem is with these shields that when you are fighting with a sword or any other weapon, you cannot extend your shield that far in front of you, which means that you will have problems with your hand, if you're extending it fully, sticking further out than the shield, so your shield cannot protect it. Which means two things. First of all, gauntlets suddenly become way more important, because now you suddenly need to protect your hand when you're fighting, because you cannot extend your shield that far out. Guards on swords also become more important, because I need to have a guard to protect my hand when I'm out there, because, well, my shield cannot protect my hand. So guards and gauntlets partly appear because of the strapped shield, but they also appear because of plate armor. When you have plate armor on you, you basically don't need a shield, because you don't need to protect your body, because if you get hit by a sword or anything, it won't matter because you're wearing full plate armor. So shields are way less necessary, and they are very heavy to carry with you, So basically people mostly just didn't use shields. Of course some did, but most of people just stopped using shields because they were necessary. And now, since you don't have a shield, well, if you have a sword without a proper guard, that is a big problem, because now suddenly your hand can get hit very easily. Therefore, two things appeared. First of all, gauntlets to simply protect the hand, but also guards. Because when you have a guard, first of all, well, you're protecting your hand, and you can also use the guard to control your opponent's blade, which wasn't really necessary or possible when you were using a shield. And that is basically why gauntlets were not that important before the end of the Viking Age, because people used shields, and that is why I don't really have gauntlets until now, and haven't focused on trying to get gauntlets, because if I was to fight, I would be fighting with a shield in any case, so I don't really need gauntlets. Of course, I will probably be trying to get gauntlets in the future, or make them, or anything like that, but it isn't really too much of a focus, because anyways, I will be fighting with a shield. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.